Hey friends, happy Thursday, 15th of July, the Ides of July. Oh my, summer is literally halfway over. Brutal. It's nice to be with you. I'll give you a reflection. I'll invite you to read the readings prayerfully. There's a link over on the side. And then to turn off your screen, spend some time with the Lord. Today is the memorial of Saint Bonaventure, Bishop and Doctor of the Church. He would have been a second, maybe a third generation follower of Saint Francis of Assisi. He would be a writer and a well-renowned writer. He's the one that wrote the definitive biography of Francis. He wrote spiritual treatises and many other learned works. He became a bishop and then a cardinal of the church. He died 1274. My recollection is that 100 years after the time of Francis's death, half of Europe was affiliated with the Franciscans, either as a lay third order or as a vowed or professed human. Bonaventure is just kind of that little image of this family of followers of Francis in those first couple generations. All right, let me give you a reflection. We're working on the book of Exodus and the Gospel of Matthew. So we have here the giving of the divine name in the book of Exodus. This is a continuation of the burning bush story. And now we have God sharing God's name to Moses. This is important, way more than we can appreciate, because to invoke God's name is to in some ways have control over the divine. And especially in the ancient world, to be able to call upon someone or something by name was seen as to have it in some ways under your responsibility. That's why the commandment is what it is, right? Do not take the Lord your God's name in vain, right? Be mindful of how you invoke God's name. And so Moses is given the name of God, I am who am, which is a different name in Hebrew. Two things. One, what's your favorite name for God? And maybe you just sit with that for a moment. And I suspect that for many of us, it might be a name that conjures intimacy and connection and protection and love and safety and communion. What's your favorite name for God? And maybe to just rest for a moment in that in prayer. Secondly, this language, I am who am. God is both and. God is both far beyond our understandings, right? And even as we understand perhaps a little bit of the grandeur of the universe, the size of creation, God is beyond that. God is greater than that. God is not the sum total of energy. God is not some force that rides on the clouds. God is outside of creation, transcendent, right? Above and beyond all that is. Yet at the same time, God is also immanent. That's the fancy word, that all things, that God is in all things, right? St. Paul would use the language, in whom we live and move and have our being. The image that I am most familiar with is that of a fish not being familiar with water, because water is what the fish is in, right? It's the ground of its being. It's a requirement for it to be alive. That's a way that I've heard spiritual authors refer to us, being in God who is in all things. And so St. Francis de Sales would describe each moment, the present, right? The sacrament of the presence of God. That the future is hope and imagination, that the past is memory, but right here, right now, I have everything that I need to experience God. The term that would be used in the contemporary culture is mindfulness, right? All of it about the same thing. God, I am who am. God in all things and through all things, in whom we live and we move and have our being. Maybe as we experience Moses receiving the divine name, we rejoice in our God, who is simply among us, or present. Okay. Gospel, Matthew. Kind of a continuation. Yesterday, you've revealed yourself to the wise, not to the wise and the learned, but to the childlike and the simple. Now Jesus continues, come to me, all you who labor, all of you who are heavily burdened, I will give you rest. Maybe we don't want rest. Maybe we want achievement. Maybe we want other things, right? But the gift that's offered to us is rest. The question that I would ask, are you heavily burdened? I can't think of many people who are walking these days who are not in some ways heavily burdened. One reflection that I've heard on this that continues to challenge me is that Jesus has promised that his burden is light. And if we recognize that our burden is heavy, perhaps we acknowledge that some of that burden is placed there by ourselves. That, in my case, the burden of Jesus is light, but the burden of Bill can at times be heavy. Perhaps we simply spend a bit of time reflecting in the yoke of Jesus, the burden of life in these days, perhaps having a conversation with the Lord about that, dreaming as well of rest in the presence of God in the midst of it all. All right, there you go. Plenty of things to pray on this morning. God who gives the name that's close to us, God who is in all things, the immanence of God, and God whose yoke is easy, burden is light, who promises rest. Happy Thursday. God bless you. Have a great day. Read those readings prayerfully. Turn off the screen. Let's be praying for each other, and especially let's be praying for folks that are having a hard time.